Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good to have you here today. Welcome to what is going to be another great lunch and learn. In fact, we've got a series. Would you go to that next slide there just with the month of February? Before I introduce today's speaker, we'll go back a couple, I guess. I didn't warn you about this, but next week, Heather Fleece, who's always a favorite speaker, will be speaking on how to talk to your kids about sex. And for some of you, that's your grandkids. Some of your kids maybe do need to hear you talk to them about sex again. I don't know, but she is great and fabulous, and nobody better to speak at that. 2 weeks from now, Dale and Marcia Hummel will be back, and they're going to talk about intentional grandparenting. So the Hummels, Dale and Marcia have been here at Wooddale for over 10 years now. Dale's been our senior pastor, and he's been away from his grandkids, but he has an amazing relationship, he and Marcia, with them, and they do some beautiful, intentional things. So even if you live far away from your grandkids, I think you'll be encouraged if you've got grandchildren. February 15th, Jim and Patty Robinson will be here, and they're going to be talking about intimacy in marriage and really understanding emotional intimacy. And so we talk about 3 different types of intimacy in our marriage courses. So sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy. They'll be focusing on the emotional intimacy on February 15th, right after Valentine's Day. So some of you husbands, if you blow it, you might be able to get like a reprieve if you come back the next day with your wife to that and take really good notes. February 22nd, my wife and I are going to talk on preparing your marriage for the empty nest years, and you'll learn from some of our mistakes and you'll learn from some of our successes. We are not perfect in any way, shape, or form in this area, and we're looking forward to speaking, and my wife will tell you all sorts of secrets about me. And so then February 29th, Terry Miller is going to be with us. Some of you know Terry's father, Tom Carell, and mother, Claire. Terry has worked for a mission organization, the Evangelical Free Church Reach Missions, and she works with missionaries who are coming off the field to think about retirement. And she's developed a curriculum that is absolutely extraordinary, that works with anyone in any field whatsoever. And so kind of thinking about, hey, when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, how do you need to think about retirement, and what are some things beyond just the bank account that you need to think about to make those years count? And so I encourage you to come on out during this month. Our guest speaker today, you're in for a treat. Bailey-Seiler is somebody who understands addiction from the standpoint of somebody who has been there, and I'm not going to rob from his story, so I'm going to let him share that. But just so you know, he's an author of a number of resources and curriculum that focus on bringing transformation to people struggling in various aspects of life. He serves as the vice president and the lead curriculum developer for Five Stone Media, which is an amazing nonprofit group here in the Twin Cities. They have a great website that is full of resources that would really, really benefit you. And he's also part of the sister organization of that called Life Support Resources. And those websites have podcasts that come out every week that Pastor Dan and I were guests on one of those recently. And but it's an amazing website with really stories of hope. And what I love about the way they do things is they, like you're going to hear today, stories of addiction from somebody who's been there. They tell stories far across the spectrum of people overcoming some incredible things in their life. So whether that's grief, whether that's addiction, whether that's financial stuff, whether that's relational poverty, whatever that is, there's some amazing stories in that website. And we'll share more with you about that afterwards. But would you welcome Lee?
Thank you, Brian. I will try to get this. I'm going to move a chair here for a second. It was very nice of you, Brian. As Brian said, in our work, we tell stories. That's primarily what we do, so I'm going to tell you a story. When I was a little boy, I had an experience that helped me, and I mean a little boy. I had an experience that helped me understand my addiction. One of my earliest memories goes like this. When I was 3 or 4, when I was a kid, I shared a bedroom with my big brother, one of my brothers. And one night I woke up, middle of the night, and I looked out the window, and there was a strange-looking man staring in the window at me. And I screamed. And I woke my brother up, of course. And I'm screaming and crying and pointing at this man out the window. And my brother didn't do anything about it. He was, I was 3 or 4, he was 5 or 6. He wasn't very much older. But pretty soon, I keep screaming and crying, and my mom walks in, and my oldest brother, who was at the time 10 or 11, walks in, and I'm yelling and crying and pointing at this man that's outside the window, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. And finally, my oldest brother kind of got through the noise and my screaming and tried to convince me that there was no man outside the window and that it was just a bush outside the window. And I wasn't buying it. I was still crying. I was terrified of this guy that was staring at me, and he seemed to be ignoring everyone and just staring at me. And my oldest brother finally went outside, and he went outside the window so I could see him out there, and he grabbed the bush and he shook it so that I could see that it wasn't the boogeyman after all. It was just something that I had imagined, but it was so real. I was absolutely terrified of something that came from here that was imaginary. So fast forward a few decades, several decades, and that experience presents a perfect picture of my addiction. As an adult, I built up irrational fears of what I thought was threatening my life. Fear of failure, of the unknown, of some legitimate things, of debt collectors, of the IRS, of not living up to who I thought the world needed me to be, all kinds of things, just on and on and on. I was afraid all the time, but unlike when I was a little boy, there was no mommy and big brother there to show me that the boogeyman wasn't real. And so I needed something else. And it took me years to figure out as an adult that I was seeing threats that weren't there. And to figure out that my addiction came from the anxiety I created for myself. And as life continued to happen, as we are adults, bad things happen. And that anxiety continued to build and grow, and I needed an answer for it because Mommy and my big brother weren't there. And so I turned to alcohol, and I started drinking to cover up that anxiety and those fears. And drinking allowed me to hide from those things. This is a really good point. If you are, if you're dealing with addiction in your family, if you know someone, if you have a friend or yourself, it's a really good point that the drinking for me was a tool to address a problem I had. And it worked great. It absolutely did exactly what I needed it to do. Right up until it didn't anymore. It stopped working. By the time it stopped working for me, I was hopeless, I was addicted, and I was in deep trouble. And this all came from underlying anxiety that I had. And I have since learned that the vast majority of people who get caught in addiction, who are trapped, have some kind of co-occurring mental health disorder, like I did, underneath their addiction. So I'm here today to share some of that I learned and some other things that I've learned in the course of my own addiction. And a lot of this stuff is stuff that God has helped me to discover about myself. I don't want you to get the impression that I am an expert, that I know everything, because I don't know everything. I don't know very much, in fact. But God has helped me discover some things, and I want to share some of that with you. I will say, though, that I normally give this kind of information to people who are in recovery. And I imagine with the number of people in this room, there are a number of people here who are in recovery, and I don't expect anyone to call themselves out, so don't worry. But I've adapted this information a little bit. So if it seems out of place or confusing or something like that, it's perfectly understandable, but come and ask me afterwards or connect with me after lunch, and I'll be happy to try to clear some things up for you. Before I say anything else, though, to those people who are here who have family members who are struggling, first of all, to you, I want you to know a couple things. I'm really desperately sorry that this kind of pain is a part of your story. It's not fair that anyone should have to go through this. It's not fair to you. It wasn't fair to my wife and my kids and everyone else. It's just not fair. And I know how dark and ugly it is when you're in the middle of it. So if you feel terrible, if you feel hopeless, if you feel like you have no control, that is completely normal. So I'm really sorry. And I also want you to know that I'm not going to have any kind of miraculous answer for you. I'm sorry. There are none. There's one. The only miraculous answer to addiction is the miracles that God can do in someone's life. And the great part about God's miracles is that he allows us to be part of it. If you're very lucky, you get to sit in the front row and be part of God's miracle and watch someone come back to life. You know, I do Bible studies and stuff on my small group, and we talk about Bible stories and stuff like that all the time. One of the things we talk about is people coming back to life. Did people really come back to life? Were there resurrections, and who was resurrected, and those kind of things. I've seen that so many times. In looking in the mirror, in other people who have come back to life from the death of addiction. And if you get to see that firsthand, man, put in the time to have that experience if you can. Let me also say that this is not just also information for people who are in addiction or who have a loved one. So I hope to have some information here that will help all of you be prepared to be part of the solution, because I think that what's missing in the addiction world is the fact that so many people don't know how to respond and help. And I think it's a golden opportunity for us to do something to make a difference, especially the community of believers. So thank you for being here. If you're sitting here, you're obviously curious about addiction for some reason. And I want to see if I can give you some answers today. And the first thing I'm going to answer is, why am I qualified? Why should you even listen to anything I have to say? And as I said, I don't have all the answers, but I have my experience. And my experience is that I have been sober from alcohol since January 13th of 2013. And I grew up solidly middle class in the suburbs. I grew up in Crystal. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We attended church every week. I was in Boy Scouts. We did all kinds of normal things. I had 3 big brothers. I attended church all the time, but there wasn't really much of a significant connection there to Christ. As an adult, when I grew up, we brought our kids to church. My wife and I continued to be part of the church. But again, God didn't really have any relevance to my life, I didn't think. My church experience didn't allow me to see how Christ and God could be relevant. And I had no real understanding of the significance of Christ in my life. Eventually, as happens to a lot of people, I let go of any connection I had to God. And I stopped going to church, and I got busy, and I was in business, and I was trying to be successful in raising kids, and I just gave up and didn't go to church. Now I can cut that corner. So my life was mostly about professional success, about looking good to other people, about making money. And it was also about my problems and solving my problems. I grew up in looking around, there's a couple people here my age. Our hair is a little bit shiny. And we grew up in a time when if you had a problem, the answer was to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and fix it and get back to work. The problem with that is I reached a point in my addiction where I looked down and I didn't have any bootstraps. I didn't have any boots. I had nothing. I couldn't do it. So as an adult, I started to have problems, and those problems got to be pretty big, and big enough for me to be afraid of them all the time. I had anxiety like crippling, and I was desperately grasping for answers to these problems. And as I said earlier, I found an answer, and it worked great. I get really good at imagining the worst possible outcomes for my life. I don't know if you've ever been there, but like, I'm going to lose my business. My wife's going to leave me. I'm going to go to jail. All kinds of crazy things, and I still do that sometime. But now I know how to deal with it, how I know how to handle it. But back then, eventually, I imagined those things long enough where most of them actually came true. By 2007, by the end of 2007, my business was failing, and I was nearly $1 million in debt. I had found some relief because I was hiding in that constant fog of alcohol. By the end of 2008, I was rarely sober, drank on a daily basis, and by the end of 2009, my business was gone. My 35 employees were out in the cold, and I was a failure. It's the only way I could see myself. For the next 3 years, I was totally lost in this dark pit of addiction. My failures allowed me to believe that I was of no value to myself, to my family, and to my children, to the world. Like most addicts, I got to be a world-class isolator. I cut myself off from everybody. I had no church, I had no spiritual community, no friends anymore. I had just simply got to a point where I had to exist day after day for no apparent reason. I would wake up in the morning and I would just try to get through the day, drinking as much as I could until I could black out that night. Eventually, I reached a point where I just couldn't do this anymore. I just couldn't go on this anymore. And I wanted it to be over so much. I would pass out every night, and I would wake up the next morning. Or I would pass out at night thinking, oh, just please don't wake up. And I would wake up the next morning, and I would go, you've got to be kidding me. I got to do this again? I don't know how to do this. So for months, I simply existed, just like that. I would hide from my family and from the world. I was in the basement, I was in the garage, I was in my car, probably most of the time, unfortunately driving around the Twin Cities blacked out drunk. And I returned home. I disappeared one night, returned home after driving around all night, blacked out, not really knowing where I was. And I got home, and there were police at my house, a number of them. The chief of police was a friend of mine and a customer of mine, and my wife had called when I disappeared. And a note that I did not intend to include here was that one thing I found out years later is that night when I disappeared, my wife called her sister over, a believer, and they kneeled down on the living room carpet and prayed for me all night long because the police couldn't do anything. So they took it to a higher power. I came home in the morning and passed out drunk on my bed, sat up a few minutes later, and my bedroom was full of police, which was not normal for me. Might be normal for some people, but it wasn't normal for me. And I said out loud to God, I give up. I can't do this anymore. If you're going to keep waking me up every day, you do it. I was desperate and I was angry and just at the end of my rope. And I gave up. And I said, God, you take this. I simply don't know how to do this anymore. You're going to have to do my life. And I hesitate to share this often, but because spiritual experiences are tricky. I had a spiritual experience as part of my recovery, and it feels like a miracle to me. But when I share this, it sometimes will bring up the idea to people that, well, how come I don't have that miracle? How come I can't get that miracle? How come my son can't get that miracle, or daughter, or whatever? And I don't have an explanation for that. All I know is that when I said to God that I give up, you have to do this, I had this sudden confidence that the struggle was over, that I wasn't going to have this problem anymore. And I didn't know how that was going to happen. I didn't know how this was all going to go away, because I had some serious consequences looking at me. People knocking on my door and legal repercussions, all kinds of things. But I had this feeling that somehow everything was going to be all right. And I didn't need to worry about it anymore, because it wasn't me. It was God's deal. It wasn't my deal anymore. So I made the decision that God would direct my life and that he would set it right. And so when I said out loud, I give up to God, and the nice police lady thought I was talking to her, and she said, okay, well, we're going to get you some help. And so they put me in an ambulance, and I went to treatment. And inpatient treatment was, or behavioral health, they call it. I went to detox, and then I went to long-term treatment, inpatient treatment, and then outpatient treatment, and then hundreds and hundreds of recovery meetings, both faith-based and not. And on that last morning also, as I said, I had this experience that lit this curiosity about God and about my faith and about spirituality. And I became curious to know God better, but I also became curious to understand my own spiritual identity and who I was. Because at that point, really, that morning, I was nobody. Everything I had been in the past, I was letting go of it. And that's what defined me my whole life. Success, being a husband, being a parent, being a business person, and then being a drunk. That all defined me. And when I said, I'm giving this to you, God, I'm giving all of that, and I don't know what's coming. So I needed to understand who I was. I can't describe for you what God has given me in recovery. He's given me so much. He's rebuilt all my relationships. He's restored my wife's relationship with me. He's shown me a new purpose for my life. As Brian said, I get to do this kind of thing for a living now, which is just extraordinary to me. Why do I get to do this? So I get to support churches and talk about difficult things and help people talk about difficult things. And my recovery has also given me the chance to meet thousands and thousands of people who have recovered from addiction or people who are trying to recover from addiction. Along the way, I learned a few things, and I'm going to try to share some of those with you and answer questions about addiction and give you some practical ways that you might be part of the solution for anyone that you know or don't know even that might be struggling. So let's, first of all, what's the first question? What is addiction? I'm not going to give you a sort of a, well, the technical answer is this. Addiction is a disease of the brain's ability to process the benefits and consequences of our choices. So we're unable now to, as addicts, we're unable to process the way our choices affect us, basically. But for my purposes, I'm going to define it this way. When I was an addict, I was doing something that I knew was hurting me. If you have an addict in your life, they know that they're hurting themselves. I knew it was hurting me. I didn't want to do it anymore, but I couldn't stop. That's really practically addiction. But most of us don't really need a definition for addiction. If you see addiction, if you're dealing with it in your family, you can see it, you know it, and, oh, that's addiction. We know that. What you want to answer is, why do they do this thing? that's hurting them. Why don't they just stop? I remember hearing that from my friends, and one of my brothers, he said, why don't you just stop? Well, okay, good. That sounds easy. Why don't I do that? So why do people get trapped in addiction? I don't want this to sound like a lecture. I'm not going to talk a lot about the science, but obviously a lot of you probably know that there are almost always a number of contributors to addiction. It's not really just one thing. Sometimes there is a precipitating event or something big that happens, which can look like a really cause, but it is almost always more than one thing. I think addiction is almost often this perception that there's something about our life we don't like. I mean, that seems pretty simple and basic, but that's really it. I mean, we don't feel good about some aspect of our life. We're discontented. And some of the contributors to addiction, most of us can understand. Like if someone gets in a car accident, get injured some way, and they get hooked on a prescription drug, and then they get trapped in this cycle of addiction. We kind of get that. There's some lifestyle things that we might understand. Poverty. People who are trapped in poverty, they're just almost guaranteed to struggle with addiction. Other life events, traumas, disease, grief, death of a loved one. We can understand these things, but then there are some other things that, like biological factors, genetics plays a part in it. The way our bodies and our brains respond to pleasure and dopamine and all that science that there's a lot of good information on out there, and I urge you to go out and find it, educate yourself about that. But I'm not going to talk about that much today. I'm going to talk about I want to focus on a different kind of contributor, and this is the contributor that really was at the heart of my addiction, and that was unaddressed mental health issues. I struggled, as I said, with anxiety and a little bit of depression, although the depression, I think, came afterwards. But really, it was mostly about my inability to deal with my feelings. And if you're anything like me, if you're a guy, that is, feelings are, something we like to avoid them. But one of the issues that families have in dealing with addictions is, in order for recovery to happen, it requires that people talk about their feelings, not just the person who's in addiction, but the family and those who are affected by it. They really have to talk about their feelings too, to find healing and to make progress and to find recovery. And for many of us, in the United States at least, I don't know what it's like around the rest of the world, we don't really like to talk about our feelings. And in Minnesota, yeah, that's really true. So that's a big part of the battle, is getting people to start to talk about it. If you know someone who is in addiction right now, I will say this: there's a very good chance that they are also struggling with underlying mental health disorder. Something co-occurring, and they might not even know about it. And the sort of tricky part is that sometimes those mental health disorders can come first, and sometimes they come around as a result of the addiction, and we don't know which wags the dog. Is it the tail or is it the dog? I don't know. Depending upon what study you look at, somewhere between 60 and 80% of people who are in active addiction also have a co-occurring mental health disorder. The most common are ADHD, anxiety, and depression by far. And if you're talking about young people, it is dramatically worse. For teenagers, there was a study, Notre Dame did a study recently. 30% of high school seniors, get this, 30% of high school seniors who attend church at least weekly have used hard drugs or alcohol sometime in the last year. No, not used, have been drunk sometime in the last year. These are the good kids. These are the ones we think of as the good kids, right? So amongst kids, there's so much mental health struggle that they're trying to hold this weight up, and it's too much for them. So why I want to talk about this is that when I went through treatment 11 years ago, and then I spent 18 months doing counseling and doing treatment and going to meetings and being sponsored and reading and studying about addiction and recovery. And you know what we never talked about in all of those settings, except just a little bit in our informal counseling? We never talked about my mental health. Once. And if you go to most recovery meetings, AA meetings, Celebrate Recovery, what have you, there's not a mention of mental health. And I wonder if you can figure out why. Why do you think we don't talk about it? It's a really important concept. It's because most people think, well, I'm not an expert. I shouldn't talk about that. Well, guess what happens when that happens? No one ever talks about it. And so people don't get better. If we don't look at these underlying things, people are not going to get better. So what happens is, and you can do this today if you want to, spend a few months around the recovery meetings. And what I did is I would watch people in the recovery meetings. I led recovery meetings. I directed a faith-based recovery ministry for a number of years. And we would watch people come in the door, start trying to get recovery, and then go back out. And sometimes, and they would go out and relapse and have an exciting life. And then a lot of times, sometimes they would die more often than we would like. But I watched countless people to come in just only to go back out. And the reason is because we never talked about what the real problem was. It is very rare that the problem of an alcoholic is alcohol, or that the problem of a drug addict is drugs, or the problem of someone who has an eating disorder is the food. It's just not. There's something else there. But we think that we can deal with this by abstinence and that kind of thing. So this is epidemic of relapse that we witness, and it's still going on today, is chalked up of one of two things. It's either the weakness of the individual or the power of the substance. It's one of those two things. And it wasn't until I was writing a mental health curriculum, talk about doing something you're not an expert at. I wrote a mental health curriculum for churches. I did have a lot of help from mental health professionals, but in writing this curriculum called Caring for Mental Health, I saw the connection between these struggles and how my own anxiety fed into my addiction. So this is why I beat the drum of caring for mental health and mental health and addiction. And I acknowledge that this can be scary. It is. But there are scary things that we have to do. I have a coworker. One of the things we do is we work in prisons and we help people who are going through reentry. And I have a coworker who goes into prison with the women, and she says, a lot of these things are scary, but you know what? You can do scary things. It's entirely possible. There are some things that are best left to professionals, sure, but not everything. We can't leave everything to the professionals. It's like leaving everything to the pastors. We can't leave everything to the pastors because there aren't enough pastors. I'm sorry. They're pretty good, but there just aren't enough of them. So there are some ways that we as individuals, as lay people, as just family and friends, can come alongside and can help someone in recovery. So let me share a few practical things that might help you. If you decide that you could do that, that you could be part of someone's recovery and see them come back to life, you can. So here, first thing, see through the addiction. It's really easy to see the addiction, but you have to try to see through it and see the person rather than the addiction. We don't love addiction. We love people. So see the person. Sometimes this can be really hard, especially if you're a family member. The damage caused by addiction, it can be hard to look past. Financial, emotional, physical. There's all kinds of damage that happens. Relationships are permanently broken sometimes. And for family members, this damage can be so big that it's hard to separate the addict from the addiction. But hate the addiction by all means. But make sure the addict knows, do whatever you have to do to make sure the addict knows that they're loved in spite of their addiction. So see through the addiction. And then, I'm sorry about this, you can't fix them. As much as we would love to fix them, you can't fix them, but there is something you can do that's even better, and that is to know them. You can't fix them, but you can know them. It makes a world of difference to someone if they feel known. What did I say about my own addiction? What was my answer? Alcohol and isolation. I hid from the world. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew my problems because I wasn't available to them. So sometimes this takes a lot of work to know an addict. You have to actually get in the trenches and try to know them. I should tell you this if you're a parent. If you're a parent out there and you're seeing your child suffer, I know you want to step in and you want to fix things. You want to make excuses maybe. Maybe you want to intervene. You want to put them in a car and take them to treatment. You can't force recovery on someone. They have to want to do it themselves. But if they want to do it, then you can help them, but you can't do it for them. And the sad news for family members is that if you're a family member or a close friend, you're probably not going to be part of the solution for that person because you're too close. You can help. You can encourage. You can refer. You can find other people to step in. But if you're really close, in my experience, you're not going to be the person that helps make the difference. It's going to be a stranger probably. So what if you want to help, but you're a stranger? What if you want to help, but you don't have a close relationship with someone, you don't know them? What do you do? So start by seeing, first of all, you see them the way God sees them. People tend to, as I said, we work in prisons, and almost everyone I know in prison has been judged by the very worst day of their life, the worst thing they did. And that's the way we tend to judge people. We find out the worst thing about you, and that's how we label you. I don't know, I'm not an expert about God. I don't know everything about God, but I do believe that He doesn't decide our value based upon our struggles. The only way to see the person through the addiction is to find a way to know them. And if there's just one thing you could do to make a difference for people in addiction, that is to create opportunities where people can know each other. This is a simple thing to do. Bring people together. This church is really good at that, by the way. One thing I absolutely love about this church is that they get this. It's really important. People understand that in order to walk through the hardest parts of life, we've got to know about each other's struggles. And we need to know each other authentically. This means creating opportunities and experiences where people can be authentic and vulnerable and share who they are and what they struggle with. If you want a picture of what that looks like, you can come to Celebrate Recovery here on Tuesday nights. It's just that kind of thing. It's an opportunity for people to come and be known. One of my heroes is Fred Rogers, and I won't take it out of my pocket, but I have a quote that I carry around in my pocket that Fred Rogers carried around for years in his pocket. It's from a Benedictine sister named Lou Konecki. She has this quote, "Engrave this upon my heart. There isn't anyone you can't love once you've heard their story." This is so true, and it is magnified 1,000 times in the recovery world. We look at people on the street corner or addicts or someone drinking out of a paper bag, and we have assumptions about them. We don't know anything about them. If you know someone's story, it's really hard to judge them and to dismiss them. So get to know them. It's really, really important. Find opportunities for people to let their story be known. Don't be afraid to share your story, too, if you've had struggles. The next thing to do is to help people, find ways to help people connect with others. This is very much related to being known, of course, but the catch-22 in addiction, as I mentioned, is for us to find our way out of addiction and into recovery, we need to be connected to people who will help us. But addicts are really good at disconnecting from everybody. So, that's a problem, right? You need people, but I don't want to be around people. So they need help. In my active addiction, isolation was a warm blanket for me. I loved it. I just had to stay away from people. I could not allow people who cared about me to see me in the throes of my addiction. It was shameful. In the recovery world, if you go to a recovery meeting, we talk about the darkness of addiction, and that's because people in addiction like the dark. It's a comfortable place. Eventually, it gets scary, but it is a comfortable place for a long time. We get really used to it. We seek out darkness because isolation, darkness, allows us to hide the thing that, number one, we're most ashamed of, and number two, that we think nobody's going to understand or forgive. If I'm ashamed of everything about me, and if I know you're not going to understand it or forgive it, what's the point of engaging? So there's a lot of work to be done to connect people. On the top of my Facebook profile, I have this statement that I've learned in recovery, and that is, to live disconnected from others is to walk the most difficult and dangerous path in life. It's being disconnected is dangerous. It is easily the best thing you can do to help people in addiction is to help them connect and come out of isolation. Author Brene Brown, I don't know if you know who Brene Brown is, I'm sure you do, but she says it this way, she probably says it a lot better. In the absence of love and belonging, there is always suffering. And this is why recovery groups are so important and effective. The recovering addict can see that this is a place where I can belong, where there are people who get me, that they understand and they've been where I've been. I think, one of the best things you can do is to help create bonds. The recovering addict needs people, places, and things that can replace the people, places, and things that were part of their addiction. Here's something essential to understand. And if you've never had a problem with addiction and you haven't been exposed to it, this is probably going to be surprising to you, but this is a truth about people who struggle with addiction. The bonds that most people have with their drug of choice, food, alcohol, cocaine, meth, whatever it is, porn, the bonds that most people have with their drug of choice are often stronger than the bonds most of us have with anything else in our lives, including our families. We're wired to be bonded to something. God wires us to be in relationship with each other. Addicts take that wiring, flip it around, and they bond with something else. They're using God's wiring to reinforce their addiction. That's a strong tool. People bond in addiction to the thing that they're addicted to. We need to be bonded to other people. And so how does that happen? Well, if you have a loved one in your life who's addicted, maintain that bond. And that's going to be your job because they can't do it. Because what are they bonded to? They're bonded to that thing, that behavior, that substance. So it's your job do whatever you have to do to maintain that bond and to create new bonds for that person. And you can get help with that. You get help with that here in this church or with your friends or other family members or friends of your loved one. Use whatever opportunities you can to create bonds for that person. The next practical thing you can do is understand this. It's important to provide opportunities to care for that person. Recovery is really opportunistic. It happens in the blink of an eye. You have these little glimpses of opportunity when someone can respond, and it will make a difference. And if nobody responds in the blink of an eye, it's fleeting, and that opportunity goes away. If you know someone who is trying to recover from addiction, you've seen this, I'm sure of it. I want to get well. Okay, I'm ready. I want to be done. And then nothing happens because nobody intervenes. Nobody says, here's how you can help. Here's how we can do this. Let's go. All right, awesome. Let's go do this. If there's nobody there to care, that opportunity is lost. So someone need to be around who knows how to help. So what do you do if you don't know how to help? Well, you need to learn, and God bless you for stepping out and coming here and learning a little bit, but this isn't going to be enough. You're going to have to learn a lot. So you're going to have to determine what kind of help they need. And all this requires that you have to be in their life. You have to know them. Someone's got to be in their life. So that at that second when they say, I have to be done, I need help, God help me, I can't do this anymore, I have to stop, that someone can step in and say, okay, let's go do this. What would you like to try to do? Do you want to go to treatment? So if you don't know that, you need to learn how to do that. It means knowing about resources. How do I help someone find a mental health counselor? How do I get someone into a detox? Where do I go to a detox? Can anyone just show up and do that? These are things you can learn, and you can find help with this here at Celebrate Recovery too. Where is the closest recovery meeting? When does the next recovery meeting work? Do you know someone who has a similar experience that you could get together and just talk to this person? Or maybe you could just sit there and listen for a half an hour and not say anything, but just listen for a half an hour. Here's a scary one. Maybe you could pray for them. It's one of the scariest things in the world to pray out loud for someone, right? I don't know how many people are in the room, but probably 90% of us don't ever pray out loud. If you want help knowing how to do that, you can learn how to do that here at this church. And it really is, it's like standing up here and talking or praying out loud, or it's all scary. It's just normal for human beings. But once you've done it a few times, it's not bad. So just start practicing, do that. All this uncomfortable stuff, this scary stuff, I have a test that I give myself. If I am prompted to do something and it's kind of scary and I don't know if I want to do it, I ask myself this question: is it more scary to do it now, to do this now, or to go to this person's funeral? Figure out how to do this stuff. The next practical thing you might be able to do is this: give them the time and the resources they need. Someone coming into a recovery from addiction needs a lot of time and a lot of resources, and I'm sorry, and it's really hard. If someone's entering recovery, they're entering a time of rediscovering who they are and learning a lot. They have to learn a lot. One of the things that will be helpful for you to understand is that people who have been abusing their brain and their spirit and their body for however long, they're not real good at learning. It's very difficult for people new to recovery. Our brains are figuratively and literally changed in our addiction, so it's harder to learn things. If you've watched someone try to get traction in recovery, you've seen this. Stuff just doesn't stick. It was so frustrating for me when I was new to recovery. I just didn't grasp things, and it took forever to learn something new. We're like little kids who need to be reminded about things over and over and over, and then that gets frustrating for people. So stick with it. Have some determination around this. Persevere. Be patient with those new to recovery and give them the time and the space they need to recover if you can. And I know this is hard because there's financial problems and relational problems and all kinds of things. Here's a fun fact that you might not know about addicts. People who are deep in their use treat their addiction like a job. Think of all the time and energy, resources, everything that you put into your job if you're still working. That's what an addict does to keep using. They spend all their time doing that. And when they go and try to get recovery, they're going to have to do the same thing to get recovery. It takes a lot of work to be an addict. It takes a lot of work to recover. And people need help. We plan everything around our addiction, and when we start to do recovery, you have to plan everything around our recovery too. I was blessed when I got recovery to have an incredible wife who gave me the time I needed to focus on. When I left treatment, I spent those 18 months working full-time on me. I didn't work at all during that time. All I did, I know it's so hard for families to deal with this stuff, but I will say that if I had to go back to work during my first year of sobriety, I don't think I'd be sober today, and I think I'd probably be dead. So I know we want to get past this, and we want to move on, and we want to start life over again, but people need time. So let me wrap up with this, and then if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. I know that addiction can be very complicated and confusing for people. There's so much information out there about substance use disorder, addiction, behavioral disorders, all kinds of stuff. It can be hard to know what's true, what applies to you, what's going on with your person in your life, what are the mechanisms, what are the contributors that are active in addiction. But all I can say is if you're in the middle of this storm, just keep trying. And know that there are people out here that are praying for you and cheering for you. And the reward is definitely worth it in the end to sit there and see the miracle of someone come back to life. Lean on God. Find people who will pray for you and pray with you. And continue to educate yourself as you are today. I have to tell you, my Google Calendar is littered with the names of people who are gone, who are dead because of addiction. People whose families I have to reach out to on birthdays that can't be celebrated anymore, on anniversaries of death. And I add new people to that calendar every year. This problem is not going away. So we need to step up, and you are a great encouragement to me because you are willing to learn and know how to step up. So thank you for being an encouragement, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lee. Lee's got a powerful story, and I hope that you see the hope in that story as well. And not every story ends up the same way, but I know there's some questions out there today, so I want to take this out there. We'll start with Chris here in the back, and
under the umbrella of relationship restoration, you touched on it very briefly, and I was quite frankly surprised because and maybe you just haven't shared that extent of it, but in a situation where one party wants to restore the relationship more than the other and to keep that healthy mental health boundary, can you address some of those things? And
yeah, sometimes it's this is a pretty deep subject we don't have probably enough time to talk about, but I have a friend who got recovery. He was in prison for 20 years or something like that, and did some terrible things, and he was alienated from his family and his little girl, and the family just wrote him off. I don't want anything to do with you. He got out of prison after 19 years, I think, and tried to reestablish connection with the family. And he had a lot of addiction too, and his family had a lot of addiction. But they said, no, we don't have anything to do with you. So that little girl just grew up and became an adult, and she had kids and got married and had a successful life, and she was a friend of mine. Actually, she came to work for us for a little while. And after almost 30 years of being estranged from her dad, she and Fred reconnected and rekindled, and they have a strong father-daughter relationship. But it took 30 years. Persistence, man. It is just be there forever. We talk about unconditional love. What is unconditional love? How long will you wait for me? What does unconditional mean? Forever. I will wait for you forever. And sometimes for you to protect yourself, you need to separate from them. And everyone gets that. Every counselor will tell you the same thing. If you need to protect yourself to be safe, because addicts will take you down with them in a heartbeat, right? But it is not the addict that's taking you down. Remember, it's the addiction that's taking you down with them. But to protect yourself, you need to separate sometimes, and that's completely understandable. Now, the person under addiction isn't going to understand it. But there are carrots and there are sticks, and both are necessary. And when relationships get established, in my life, when relationships came back, they definitely didn't come back all at once, all of them. So I have one kid who was just like, it was like nothing happened. I have 3 other kids, and it took a while. And one of those kids, the youngest one, who was most affected by my addiction, it took 2 or 3 years before I felt like we were kind of back where we were. So it's going to take time. This is big destruction that's happening, and you can't expect things to come back really quickly. I hope that answered. I don't know if helpful.
Super helpful. Okay, I'm going to go to the opposite side, then I'll come back to the middle here. So
Brian's getting his workout.
I love getting my workout here. Down 12 pounds, guys, in the last 2 weeks, so I'm feeling really good about this, and here we go.
My question, Lee, you mentioned that you do prison ministry.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what percentage, if you can put a number to it, are people that you have been involved with in the prison ministry, felons, who are really there as a result of
Addiction?
Addiction.
All of them. No, not all of them, but it's virtually all of them. It is. I haven't done a study, but there have been studies done, and you can look up. The Minnesota Department of Corrections has a study on this too, and it's massive. It's 80, 90%. Yeah. By the way, if you want to know anything about our prison ministry or mental health ministry or anything that we do, I've got business cards over on the table over there. You can grab one, or you can ask me afterwards, and go to lifesupportresources.org. We produce resources for churches to do ministry around this stuff, and we give it all away. So if you'd like to support that kind of work, we would take that too.
Yeah, everything they do is free, which I love about your ministry, that they do give it away. It does cost money to produce it. So, but beautiful. Okay, we're going to come right here really quick before I come to this question though, the relationship between mental health, because you weaved that a little bit, and addiction.
Yep.
You worked with Quest 180 at Brook Church, helped lead that, and one of the shifts that you guys made in recovery was to bring that mental health curriculum into the recovery process. Right. We have a brand new recovery director here. That's something that we're talking about doing here as well, and incorporating some of what you've done, because it's just such an important part. The percentage of people in addiction programs where mental health components, you've shared it with me before.
It's about 80%.
80%.
Yeah.
All right. And so if we ignore that with the 80%, well, we're missing a big deal.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll be quick because I know we only have a few minutes, but not even a question, just an observation. There's a large group of the population, I don't know what the percentages are, that I would call functional. We haven't really discussed this. I was one of them. Functional addicts, or I abused alcohol. Successful Navy pilot, successful airline pilot, 30-year marriage. I would just like to add that not everyone flames out and burns. I had no DUIs. I know a lot of functional addicts. My brother's a Marine Corps colonel. My sister's a high-ranking naval officer, Coast Guard. All the things that you said, I'm a CR guy. Everything that you said is true about functional abusers. But they're walking around, but we don't label them as crash and burn people, like that end up in prison or.
I say that there are a lot of addicts out there who are hiding in plain sight.
And I know the scientists categorize on the spectrum, full-blown addict versus alcohol abusers. It's a very slippery slope, and I'm not sure I buy that distinction. But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
I agree. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
All right, maybe one more. We're a couple minutes over, but I know it's a topic people are wondering about. Anybody else? I'll leave you out. Yeah.
Just a quick question. I'm trying to understand the mental health part of this, because I have a friend who has a daughter who is an eating disorder disease. And some people say it's a mental problem, and some people say it's an addiction. What is the definition in between the two? Because mental health, to me, is something that hopefully can be treated with not just therapy, but with chemicals. And the addiction is mostly therapy and help from other people. So could you define that a little bit better for me?
I think, no. The answer is no, I can't define it for you. But I will ask my therapist next time I see him. Just to be serious for a second, a couple weeks ago, I think, was Todd here a couple weeks ago?
Todd was here a couple weeks ago.
So if Todd Mulliken is ever around, he'll answer that question for you in a really good way. And what I will say, though, is that, as you said, it's a blurred line between them, and often, and most of the time, actually, they're co-occurring, and one of them doesn't stop here, and then the next one starts. They overlap, and so you have to treat them both. And sometimes you do treat chemical dependency with other chemicals. That happens sometimes too. So there isn't really a right answer, and it's very individual. So you have to be really careful about kind of broad brushing it.
Yeah, that's great. No, and you're right, because you'll have mental health practitioners who will say what you need is counseling, and you'll have others who will say, no, you have a chemical imbalance of the brain. And they're both mental health issues that are dealt with in different ways. And so, hey, this has been really helpful. And, we are the Family Resource Initiative. And what I love about Life Support Resources, we share the resource in our name, you get that, is that resources that are shared between organizations can be such a blessing. And so Wooddale Church has used your Caring for Mental Health curriculum in the past. Pastor Dan has information about that. We've got in the back here, we have a wonderful ministry called Family Grace that is about if you've got somebody in your family who's struggling with a mental health issue and you're trying to come alongside and support. So some of you may have been here today to understand from the standpoint of a family. Tricia Sonison's back here. Can you wave your hand, Tricia? She can let you know about that ministry, which is starting up again next month, February 3rd. We've got our next unit of that, February 13th. This Caring for Mental Health is a wonderful deal that Todd Mulliken has actually been really involved in the curriculum there. So if you've enjoyed Todd here, Todd partners with them. And there's just a number of other great resources. So make sure you pick up one of those cards because I think you're going to be blessed by that, okay? And then just two last things. We've got two groups launching with Family Resource the next week. One is launching this Sunday, and that's Financial Peace University. Sometimes addiction shows up in the area of finances and how we're handling that. And you may have found yourself spiraling out of control there, and you just need somebody to help you get back on track. That's Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. here. You can find out more at our website. And then next Tuesday night, our next unit of Reengage starts. And that's a wonderful ministry for any couple at Wooddale Church who wants to reconnect, reignite, or resurrect their marriage. And it's not just people from Wooddale. In fact, more than 50% of this next semester's group do not attend Wooddale. And so that's really exciting. And we'd love to have you join us for that if that's something you think would benefit your marriage. And many of the people who go through Reengage find out that, there's a hurt, habit, and hang-up that's maybe contributing to some of the stuff in our marriage that I need to deal with. And so we partner with CR there too. Hey, one more speaker that's going to be coming up in the Lunch and Learn series this spring is Sinai Thau. Sinai is our brand new leader of Celebrate Recovery at Wooddale. Like Lee, he has an amazing story. 4.5 years ago, he was addicted to both cocaine and alcohol. and God has delivered him in an incredible way. But Chris, your question about relationships, which is so good, Sinai will tell you, he's still praying for some healing and some family relationships and for the opportunity. But God is using him, and he doesn't waste any of our stories to do some beautiful things here. And you'll get to hear from Sinai, and I believe, let's see, it's coming up, maybe April, I don't know, it's on your list, April 18th. You've got it, April 18th. Thanks for coming, everyone. Have a great week. Great to see you.